I'm Aryeh Schwartz, along with Eli Horowitz, and welcome to the WNBA Insider Show. Each week, we cover in-depth topics in the league, giving honest and critical analysis. This week, we have our 2018 WNBA Draft Board. Eli Horowitz, say hi to the folks, and let's get right into this. Number one pick, the newest team in the WNBA. I know we all got a consensus pick, and that's A'ja Wilson going number one to the Las Vegas Aces. Eli, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, no surprises there. You know, won a national title at South Carolina last year, in the thick of the tournament right now. This is just a league where if you don't have elite bigs, you have no chance. You know, Brittany Griner, Sylvia Fowles, Tina Charles, Jonquel Jones, Brianna Stewart, Liz Cambage, Nneka Ogwumike, Candace Parker. Like, if you, like, and I'm probably forgetting some, if you don't have elite bigs, you can't win in this league. It's not like the NBA that's gone like almost completely small ball. Bigs still run this league, and A'ja Wilson has that potential. You know, whether she plays the 4 or the 5 doesn't matter. She has the potential to be that elite front court player. And so you just can't pass up on a talent like that.
And we're going to get into, first, guys, what we're going to do is we're going to break down basically what we know from people that we've talked to in different teams and kind of the consensus, if you will, as of right now of who's going 1 through 12 for the first round. And then we're going to break down who we think might be able to slip into different spots and be a better fit for the team. Moving on to number 2, as many people are expecting, and again, the consensus, Kelsey Mitchell going to the Indiana Fever. Your thoughts on that, real quick? I'm
not as high on Kelsey Mitchell as some of the other, or maybe not, I won't say some, as one other player. Do we want to get to what we would do differently, or just kind of get through the list first?
Let's go through the list first, and then kind of move on from there. Number 3 that we're hearing is Gabby Williams going to the Chicago Sky. Then you got number 4, Diamond DeShields, going to the Chicago Sky again, and we're big.
Flipped. It doesn't matter. They have both picks. You know, I'm actually seeing Diamond 3, but it doesn't matter.
We saw that that year when UConn went 1, 2, 3. And then the team who picked 3 also had 4. So it was like, does that really matter? They could have done whatever. They did it. Number 5, Jordan Canada going to the Seattle Storm. Number 6, Lexi Brown going to the Dallas Wings. Number 7, Victoria Vivens going to the Washington Mystics. Number 8, Maria Vadeeva going to the Fever with their second pick of the first round. Number 9, Kia Nurse going to the Connecticut Sun. Number 10, Ariel Atkins going to the New York Liberty. I'm probably going to mess up this name. Number 11, Stephanie Mavunga going to the Sparks. And number 12, Monique Billings going to the Phoenix Mercury. Now, again, that's kind of like the consensus that we're hearing and through people we've spoken to, that, and a lot of people are really expecting that. Eli, let's get into the positions that we feel would be most likely to swap or possibly just to us make a little bit more sense going in a different direction. Do you want to go first? Or because for me, it starts with number 5 with the Storm. I think,
just to be clear, like, we've talked to multiple GMs and coaches, and obviously things can always change, but this is at this point, you know, on March 20th, this is about what we're hearing. But you go first. Let's think of it this way. Not what will happen differently, because we're not the GMs, and that's not our call. But what would you do differently?
All right, if I'm the Seattle Storm, and I know this most likely won't happen, so I'm going to asterisk this, I go Lexi Brown with 5. I think personally she's a better fit for this team. Canada is a little bit undersized, skill set wise and ceiling. She probably, or pretty commonly, it's accepted that she has a higher ceiling. She's just an overall better player. But to me, it's not necessarily about that. It's about what this player brings to your team. By going Canada, I think you're getting a smaller set player who's a little bit less of a true point guard in the sense of facilitating the whole team. In Lexi Brown, you get someone who can do that a little bit better than Canada and is kind of more in her role. And if you take Canada, you're kind of putting Jewel Lloyd, your second best player on the team right now, in an odd position because they kind of fit the same role. And that is unless you believe that Jewel Lloyd can go into into the true point guard position. But if you do that, you are extremely undersized in your backcourt.
I think that is actually a very fair point, and I don't really thought about it. Like Canada, if you're talking about backcourt of the future, once Sue Bird retires, you have Canada and Lloyd. I mean, that is pretty undersized. Now, Canada is a really good defender, and I mean, both those players can get to the rim pretty much at will. So that's a pretty scary backcourt offensively. But yeah, it would be a small backcourt. They would definitely need a really, really big three next to them, to guard the bigger guards. But I guess what I would counter to you is that, like, Canada, I think, is just a tier kind of above Lexi Brown in overall talent. Her burst of speed, I think her first step acceleration is just much, much higher. Lexi Brown's a really great shooter and passer, and also I think a good defender. I think Canada just has that acceleration, that like elite athleticism that Brown doesn't quite have. And I think when you're drafting, I hear you that you got to think about fit, but I'm more a believer if you take the best talent available. And so I think Canada is just a more talented player. And if Seattle took Lexi Brown, now you're giving Canada to Dallas.
There's
and that's
so
a team
many
you're directly
talented players.
competing with. So
and then when you think,
you
this
have
team
to
could take this
err
person,
on the side
that
of
affects
talent.
what happens next, and it's a domino effect. Because for me, if I'm the Wings and I'm going into 6, and this is just like, again, my ideals of what I think would be an amazing fit, I know this is a player you're high on, so I'm curious your thoughts on this. Victoria Vivens to the Wings at 6 as the heir to the Glory Johnson throne.
A lot to unpack there. Let me first finalize on Canada and Brown. Is I have league sources that have said that these teams want Canada so bad that they're actually thinking about trading up with Chicago to try to guarantee that they get Canada. So let's just throwing that into the equation, which I think is kind of interesting because I don't think Chicago would take them. I think Chicago will take Gabby and Diamond and or Kelsey Mitchell if she fell. So I feel like for Seattle to trade up would be a little puzzling because I think they'd still get her at 5, but maybe Dallas at 6 is sitting there saying, shit, we might have to trade up because if we really want Canada that bad, we can't let Seattle. So that's just something to throw in there to think about. But I really like Victoria Vivian's. It's kind of, if you listen to our top 10 podcast, it's kind of like that. She's somebody to me that has the size to play all 3 guard positions. I think she's just a big guard who has versatility. And like I said, it's rare to find players that can play both ways. And so I actually, when I did my mock draft without even before I talked to league sources, I had her like as high as 2, 3, 4, just as far as like players I like personally. Now, I don't think she'll go as high as 2, 3, 4, but I think if Washington gets her at 7, I mean, that's a steal. I mean, she's a player that's going to would fit in perfectly next to Della Don and Christy Tolliver. I mean, she'd fit right into that culture. And like I said, she just has more versatility than Canada
I don't know.
and Brown. She
I
can
feel
play
like
multiple guard positions.
A lot of people have been talking about Vivens going to Mystics at 7. I hear that. I completely get it. For some reason, it just doesn't gel in my mind. I watching her, I'm going to call her Vivi, watching her videos, her highlights and stuff, it's just a pleasure to watch her play. She's so fluid and fast on both ends that it's really fun. And that's why I like watching her. I always try and say, get your mind on pro WNBA players and former WNBA players and kind of compare it to them. And to her, I really see a similarity in many ways, not perfect, but to Glory Johnson. So that, that's kind of a pipe dream of mine. So let's.
Yeah. I mean, some people are saying that she has a bit of tunnel vision, like as smooth as her game is offensively, that she needs to learn to see the floor and in college she can just kind of get the ball and go make a play, and she, against the average college defender, she's just going to cook them. But in the WNBA, like, you got to be able to move the ball. I'm not too worried about that. Like I said, I think our sources are saying she'd be 7, but she's someone I would think about even earlier in the draft. Even Chicago, I'd be really tempted. I mean, if you bring in like Gabby Williams and Vivian's, like, you've added like a 3 and a 4 or a 2 and a 3 that just have so much length and size.
But answer me this: okay, I get the whole Chicago idea. If I'm Chicago, I'd definitely be willing to trade with the Storm. Just thinking about it, like, you want to trade one down, but not too many down, because if you trade too many down, then you're losing out on the opportunity to get Gabby Williams or Diamond DeShields. And to me, obviously, yes, Gabby Williams is amazing. Diamond DeShields is somebody who I'm going to take over Vivi, minus the effects that she might have on, the locker room and whatnot. And we all know the story of, I believe she made a demand at one point saying she would only play for the Wings. So that's something, it's hearsay, it's jibber jabber, but it's something to keep in mind. Who's the next one that you would kind of slip out? Now, I think the next question that's kind of the most interesting, you said for the Mystics, I wish there was a true center in this draft that I feel would be kind of a headline, if you will, who's already polished enough. And I say that because a lot of people are talking about number 8, Maria Vadiva, going number 8 to the Fever. What are your thoughts on those two picks?
Indiana's, Vadiva, I think at 8, you probably take her because I feel like after 8, there's a big drop off. And Kia Nurse, I think, might surprise people. I think she's better than people are saying. I've actually heard she might move up a little bit, but I think most people are saying the top 8 is a bit cut above. And I think Vadiva is probably higher than 8 as far as prospects, but I think she's a bit younger. There's uncertainty because of, potential overseas commitments. But I think once you get to number 8, you got to take the risk for Indiana. And knowing they have this number 2 pick, I think now they'd be a little more comfortable taking that risk.
I'd agree with that, and I very much so agree with your Kia Nurse thoughts. I mean, that was why when I was so critical of the Minnesota Lynx trade, and now obviously I don't necessarily think Kia Nurse is going to drop to 12, but I think, like, in early predictions, a lot of people were starting to say that she possibly could, just because of fittings who they want, and then Minnesota, like, that's why I disagree with this whole notion that you can't get a good player at 12. I think that's kind of, covering the back end after something happened. But let's move down a little bit more. Number 9, the Connecticut Sun. Now, a lot of people are saying Kia Nurse is going to get her. Obviously, Canada wouldn't be there late, because what I think the Sun need is a true 3-point shooter, somebody who's just a lights-out shooter. It can drop some big points. What are your thoughts on if the Sun were going to go somewhere else? Who do you think they might?
I think 9 through 12 is pretty interchangeable, but I think Connecticut would take Nurse or Ariel Atkins, a guard, because they have Shanae Agumekwe, they have Jonquil Jones, they have Alyssa Thomas, they have Morgan Tuck. Like, they traded for Kayla George. Like, they have 5 solid bigs, and they're not in win now mode in the way like Minnesota or LA is. But they're in that next tier of being pretty close to win now. So I think they need more. I think the guard spot is where they're a little bit weaker. So I think, Nurse or Atkins would be a good fit there. I think Nurse might have a bit more of a higher ceiling, but Atkins can do a lot. And she distributes the ball well, but she can play the 2. And then New York as well. I think it actually lines up well for Connecticut and New York. I think both those teams have more depth, have a lot of size, but need guards that can produce. And so I think 9 and 10 I see being those 2 players. And
I personally think Billings is a better fit for LA. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I like Billings at 11. Her her and Jordan Canada on UCLA. They've been dominant all year. Again, a team that's not very deep, and those two have carried them. They're in the Sweet 16, so they play this weekend. So definitely a team to check out because you can see two first-round picks in one team. I think that LA needs help in the front court. I feel like they brought in Cappy to kind of bring in that other guard they needed, and now they need to add a big. Obviously, Candace and NECA start, and then you have Jantel Lavender, and Carson can play a little bit at the 4, but is more of like a 3. So they definitely are a bit thin on the interior. So I think, Mavunga or Billings would address that, but I think Billings is more of that player that can kind of make an impact right away in a small role and has the potential to be like a double-double type player.
A lot of people are saying Mercury go front court also.
You mean at number 12?
Yeah, sorry, Mercury at 12.
They're an interesting one. They added all 3 positions in the offseason, right? They added Sancho Little, so they added a big. They got Bonner back as a wing, and they added January. So they kind of addressed all 3 positions. So I think I think at that point you just take the best player available. I think they're in a win now mode. Whoever they take at 12 is not going to I don't think they're going to get many, minutes at all, really. So I think you just take best available, but the tie, like I've said, it's a big league. So tiebreaker kind of goes to the bigs, and Griner's missed games. So I think if you're thinking about an insurance policy, adding size when Griner has had her injury problems, can't hurt. Do you have any different takes on that on that?
I think it would be smart for them to find someone who can back up Griner. Number 12 is, I think, because of where you're at in this draft, you can do something, high risk, high reward. Okay. So what I mean by that is go for a point guard, go for somebody who you feel has is just a shooter. Somebody who can light it up because, I know you have that in Mitchell, or sorry, in Leilani, yeah, Mitchell. But I want to see someone who's going to fill in for DT when she's going out. They haven't really started to address that role yet. And that's something I'd like to see them do. I mean, do you feel like they've started to address that role? For instance, Seattle, who's in a similar role, has started to address that role. LA, who not necessarily in a similar role, but with Parker, has kind of addressed that role with NECA. Is it time for the Mercury to address that role?
I do agree with you that they need to address that role, but I don't think at that point there's going to be a point guard that is the point guard of the future. And, I just think you got to take best available. And I'm just looking up, Mavunga's averaging 17 and 11 this year. Hey, sometimes for me, I don't know. It can be hard to tell with some of these bigs in college because the average, I watch some of these games and the players they're going up against are just so much smaller. You know what I mean? I'll see a big who's scoring, but the player guarding her is 3 inches shorter.
Yeah,
I hear you on the point guard thing. I guess my rebuttal would be who? I feel like your argument makes sense, but I don't know who that player is.
Well, I guess I kind of look at it as I'm not looking for the concrete stop, the concrete fill for Diana Taurasi, because I don't think you necessarily are going to find that for a while just because of the talent you have on this team and not getting really high drafts. You're not going to have the ability to get a top 5 player. I will say that because Diana's minutes need to lower, you can find someone who played right, can facilitate some of the same things that you need from Diana in those ways. But moving on, because I think this topic's a lot more interesting. Number 2, Indiana Fever, the number 2 draft, and Kelsey Mitchell is what a lot of people are saying. Now, the biggest criticism is she a true enough point guard or is she just a scorer? Kind of similar to Kelsey Plum. Kelsey Plum kind of came in with some criticism. There were some questions about whether or not San Antonio at the time wanted her. Do you think that Kelsey Mitchell is a complete player that can do more than score?
At this point, no. I think she is a very good scorer. She can shoot the three, a dynamic player with a very high ceiling. But I do think like she's really, really good at scoring. But I don't think she's like a traditional point guard. I think she really, at the end of the day, is more of a shooting guard in a point guard's body, if you will. But like this is a very young player, so I'm not gonna say she can't improve in those other areas. I just think if you're asking me today, she's not as complete of a point guard as some of the others. Having said that, like her ability to score and just like her overall ceiling, I think is a step above Canada and Brown. I think unfortunately for Indiana, they're kind of in one of those positions where you could like. Not dissimilar from Vegas. Like she's just clearly like the second, like she has such a high ceiling. It's like hard for Indiana not to take her. Like in some ways, I think DeShields could be even better, or Gabby Williams could be like a more valuable player to like filling a role, like you've kind of said, and how someone fits on a team. But yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to ask is who do you think, think position-wise this team needs? Position-wise.
I think they need a guard. And because there's not like an elite center other than Vidiva, I think you go with a guard, and then it's DeShields versus Mitchell. I personally, there's a part of me that feels like DeShields is just a bit more versatile, just more physical of a player, can kind of play the wing and the guard position. Like I feel like DeShields and Gabby Williams are players that can kind of guard bigs and guards. So that one would be really tough for me. But I do think Indiana will go with Kelsey Mitchell. Like I said, I think Chicago's sitting pretty because DeShields could be better than Mitchell, and they really don't have to make that decision. Like I feel like Chicago's in the perfect position where they can get Gabby Williams, and then they can just take Mitchell or DeShields based off what Indiana does.
Aces are put in a really tough position, and everyone's looking at me going, oh, they have the number one pick. How is that a tough? So like often when you have the number one pick, you're like, yes, I need this position, and the best player in the draft is that position. So this works great. Lovely. But that's not necessarily the case for the Aces. Then you talk Fever, who are in the need for a guard. Seriously, I mean, they opened up that position for the draft with the trade of January to Phoenix. So my question is, Sky, what's going on? And the Sky are sitting there at 3 and 4 going, hey, we get to take top talent. To have two in the top 5 picks, that's amazing. Like you can literally the next morning wake up and say to your fan base, we have recovered from when we lost our league MVP, Elena Deladon. We now have 4, arguably in their starting 4, or in their starting 5, they will have 4 people who are top 5 picks in the draft.
And how good does that trade? I mean, God, how good does that trade look for them now? I mean, they got a lot of criticism at the time.
I criticized.
They traded Boyette to Atlanta for their draft pick. And I think there was some other pieces in that trade, but that was kind of the main part of it. And I mean, come on. I mean, look what Chicago to be sitting here with these 2 picks.
Stafford McGee.
Yeah, and I apologize. I think at the time of the trade, to be fair, it was Boyette, right?
Yeah.
I still think I'd much rather have a top 4 pick. And Atlanta, I mean, it's not the trade was done last year, so the current Chris Sanko's the GM of Atlanta. It wasn't his move. But man, would they, with all the talent they have, imagine if they had a top 4 pick to add to what they already have.
I mean, at that point, it's just kind of like, screw you guys. You have too much good luck.
Yeah. So what do you have any different thoughts on the kind of should Indiana even consider DeShields or anyone else, or is Mitchell just too hard to pass on that type of talent?
Well, it's a sticky situation. I think they cleared out the point guard position. So looking at them, you have to look at it. And if you're not taking your next starting point guard or your point guard of the future with the number 2 pick, then you have to feel pretty goddamn confident that you can get that person at the number 8. I don't think the Wings necessarily are looking for a point guard, even though a lot of people are saying Lexi Brown to the Wings. Or, they want Canada. I'm not necessarily in that camp as far as understanding the logic behind that. if I'm them, again, I want somebody more of a wing, but I'm not them, so I don't get to make that choice.
Well, I think the just to counter, the reason I do like Lexi Brown for Dallas is because she's a really good 3-point shooter. And I actually think Diggins Smith is a serviceable shooter, but not an elite shooter. So I actually think Brown and Smith could kind of complement each other pretty well. But I do hear you. Like, they should really take a good look at Vivian's, because Vivian's probably fills a need a little bit more. But I think Lexi Brown would be a good fit there as well. Yeah, man. The more you look at it, I just wouldn't want to be at number 2, because I think, what if you take Kelsey Mitchell and it doesn't work out, and then Chicago's there, and then you take Vadiva, man, like it could really backfire. Let's say Vadiva just never really develops, or she has overseas commitments, and it turns out that Kelsey Mitchell is a great scorer, but doesn't really bring much else.
Well, that's why, we have 2 teams that are, and both Eli and I, folks, were huge on the Indiana Fever trade, but that's very dependent on them doing good on this. And honestly, I think even if they don't do too well on this, it's still a smart trade because of the opportunity that they could have had to do good on it. It's so tough because, the Sky are in this. Like, to me, the big stories of the draft are the Fever and the Sky, because those are 2 teams that can completely reshape their team if done right in the draft. And I think the Sky, it's harder for the Sky to screw up this draft.
They're in a good position. But look, it's a good draft, certainly 1 to 7. And if Vadiva is committing for full seasons, 1 to 8. And I think even like Kia Nurse if she goes 9, that's a good top 9. And I like all 12 players we've talked about. So, like we've said, I believe talent just is going up. And I think, yes, in the past, picks 7 through 12 haven't necessarily panned out, but I think that's going to start to change. I mean, even thinking about the talents of next year, like Asia Durr, and then after that, Ionesco of Oregon. I mean, I think talent just kind of rises with time.
The WNBA compete earlier in their careers, as opposed to, a couple of years ago when it was less and less. And we've really seen that grow from maybe a draft that has 1 or 2 future stars to a draft that, like we're saying right now, could very well have 9 stars in the next couple of years who can really shape this league. And that's something that's really, really exciting. And we're going to talk more about different fun topics. We did our top 10 players in the league for 2018. I think soon we might have to break down a few more fun lists. Is there any last comments you want to give the people before we sign off this week?
No, I just think, there could be trades, things could change. Let me just list who's still in action. Asia Wilson's still playing. Gabby Williams is still in action. Jordan Canada, Lexi Brown. And that's a good one because Duke's playing UConn this weekend. So very curious to see how Lexi Brown does against such a great team. Vivian's is still in action. Kia Nurse, Ariel Atkins, and Monique Billings. So you can see, I think, 9 of these 12 players, you can see them in action this weekend.
Well, that's ridiculous, especially considering, a lot of people praise that we need to use the NCAA Women's League to build into the WNBA. And that's how it starts, guys, is WNBA fans kind of dipping into the NCAA and then pulling out more people and paying attention and knowing who the next talents are and who they're going up against. And I'm excited to watch some of these players, and I've been watching them so far, and it's been a good time. That's all for us this week, folks. Again, I'm Aryeh Schwartz, along with Eli Horowitz, and this has been the WNBA Insider Show. Each week, we cover in-depth topics around the WNBA, giving honest and critical analysis. That's all for us, folks, and find us on www.WNBAinsidr.com. You can follow our podcast on iTunes, and you can catch our show on Dash Radio. Eli.
It was a pleasure. Definitely follow us on, check me out on Twitter at Coach Horowitz 13. And, we're open for feedback, suggestions, questions. Always trying to make this show better.